Welcome back for today's video. Got 5 new polls that have come out this week. 3 of them are taking a look at the national 2020 Democratic primary picture and then also some early states, those being South Carolina and New Hampshire specifically. Now, starting off with this week's morning consult poll, we have Joe Biden staying there in a steady first place at 33% support. Bernie Sanders a tick up to 20% support, and he has gained 1% in each of the past 2 weeks of morning consult polls. He was at 18, then he went up to 19, now he's at 20. We see Elizabeth Warren there at 14 percentage points. Kamala Harris really took a beating with her numbers after a poor second debate performance, now back into single digits, sitting there at 9% of support. Mayor Pete Buttigieg at 5%, Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke each at 3%, and Andrew Yang at 2 percentage points. Everyone else is at 1 percentage point or less. And we can see, tracking over time, Joe Biden has been very consistent at that 33% of support in recent weeks, while Bernie has seen his numbers go up, and Elizabeth Warren been pretty steady here in the mid-teens. We can see that big fall off from Kamala Harris after the second debate. And also, I just want to take a look at the second choice of these upper tier Democratic hopefuls. And this is actually really good news for Elizabeth Warren, the fact that Harris supporters and Buttigieg supporters, she is the second choice of them, because with Harris and Buttigieg, at least how things currently stand, being in 4th and 5th place, you would think that more than likely they would be the ones that might bow out earlier than candidates like a Sanders and Biden, who are consistently 1 and 2 in the polls. So if Harris and Buttigieg do bow out at some point in the race, it's possible that Elizabeth Warren could get a boost from that and continues to stay competitive at the top along with Sanders and Biden. But there's still a lot of moving and shifting that can take place in upcoming months before we actually even get to the first caucuses and primaries. Now, moving on to the next national poll, this one coming from Rasmussen, and we see Joe Biden here in first place at 28% support, Bernie Sanders in second at 15%. And kind of interesting with Bernie Sanders, a lot of people just say that it's white men that support him, but actually, based on the numbers, that's usually not as much the case. So we see Bernie Sanders here, 17% from female, 13% from male. Quite a difference there in those particular numbers. Also doing pretty well amongst the younger age demographic, but they're at 15% in second place. Elizabeth Warren at 10 percentage points, Kamala Harris at 7%. Pete Buttigieg at 3%, as well as Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker at 2%, Julian Castro at 1 percentage point. Everyone else is also at 1 percentage point or less from there in this Rasmussen poll. And I also just want to take a look at the makeup of race by support for these candidates, and we can see Biden, 29% from white, 35% from African American, 21% from Hispanic, where Bernie, a lot of his support continuing to come from Hispanics at 23%, while it's at 13 percentage points respectively for both white and African American, while Elizabeth Warren is 13% from whites, 7% from African Americans, 6% from Hispanic. Now going over and taking a look at our third national poll, this one coming from YouGov and The Economist, and it asked, who is your first choice amongst the Democratic candidates? Joe Biden in first place at 21% of support. In second place, we have Elizabeth Warren at 20%, and then also Bernie Sanders there at 16% support. Everyone else is in single digits. We have Kamala Harris at 8%, Mayor Pete Buttigieg at 5 percentage points, and then everyone else is a bit lower than that. Now taking a look at early states, going to start here with South Carolina. I apologize, the numbers in this article aren't laid out in a really eye-pleasing manner by any means. It's just down here on the side of the article, but this one coming from Change Research. And in my opinion, actually with both of these early state polls, I have a strong opinion on both of them. So with South Carolina, if Joe Biden doesn't win South Carolina, that means I don't think he has any chance at going on and winning the nomination, because he needs to do very well amongst African American voters to go on and win the nomination more than likely. And South Carolina, even if Biden comes up short in Iowa and New Hampshire, South Carolina is going to be a big proving grounds state for him potentially. Now, if he does go on to win Iowa and New Hampshire, you would expect him to do even better in South Carolina and then be in a very strong position in first place. But it's a big-time proving grounds area here for Joe Biden. And basically in South Carolina, poll after poll, he's in a commanding first place position. And that's the case again here with this one from Change Research, where he has 36% support. A lot of African Americans are going to be voting in the primary in South Carolina. Then we have Elizabeth Warren at 17%, Bernie Sanders 16 percentage points, Kamala Harris at 12%. You need to get at least to 15 percentage points to be part of the candidates that divvy up those pledged delegates. So that's an important number to get beyond. Now, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they don't have to win these southeastern states that have a lot of African-American voters in the primary, but they just have to stay competitive and then perhaps do better in other areas of the country where Biden might not have quite as good of strengths, in contrast to candidates like Warren and Sanders. It's going to be fascinating how that dynamic plays out. Now, Bernie Sanders specifically, if we look back to 2016, he did good in areas of the country such as the Mountain West and then out into the West Coast, also in the Northeast and throughout the Midwest, whereas the Southeast, that's where he really took a beating in his head-to-head with Hillary Clinton, and he's just looking to try to make things a bit more competitive this go around. We'll see if he's able to do that once we get those states rolling around with their primaries. Now moving on to the last poll that I want to touch on. This one is from New Hampshire, and I also said I had a statement on this one, and that's if Bernie Sanders doesn't win New Hampshire, I don't think he has any chance at going on in winning the nomination, just because of how well Sanders did in New Hampshire last time around in 2016. It's the neighboring state to Vermont. He's extremely well known around that part of the country, and like I said, back in 2016, this was an area that he showed a lot of strength. So a proving ground state for Bernie Sanders and his campaign is going to be New Hampshire, and I would be pretty surprised if Sanders didn't win New Hampshire, just like I'd be pretty surprised if Biden wasn't able to go on and win South Carolina, probably even more so with Biden in South Carolina. But Sanders, in this Gravis marketing poll from New Hampshire, is in first place at 21% support, followed by Joe Biden at 15%, Elizabeth Warren at 12%. Also, probably an important state for Warren to do well in, given its neighboring state, Massachusetts, is where she is a senator from, and she's trying to play with a lot of these Sanders-type voters with that progressive message. There's a lot of tie-ins with both of these two progressive candidates, and back in 2016, the progressive candidate Sanders did extremely well in the Northeast, so that's also where Elizabeth Warren is going to want to do well. Also, we have uncertain here at 11 percentage points. Uncertain isn't a particular candidate, obviously, just people that haven't made up their mind. Pete Buttigieg at 8%, Kamala Harris at 7%, Tulsi Gabbard doing pretty good in this one at 5%, Amy Klobuchar at 4%, Yang at 4%, Tom Steyer as well at 4%. That's also kind of an outlier there for Steyer, and then everyone else is at 2 percentage points or less. And also, this Gravis marketing poll had some other interesting numbers that I'd like to go through. So Trump's job performance, 32% strongly approve, 12% somewhat approve, so 44% there overall, and then 54% disapprove, with 48% of that being strongly disapproving. And then some other numbers, particularly with the Senate race in New Hampshire. Some people think it could potentially be competitive, but the head-to-head matchups here between Shaheen and some of these Republican challengers are looking pretty good for the incumbent. She has a 13-point lead there. She has another 13-point lead in that matchup. And then we look at these presidential matchups between Trump and some of these upper-tier Democratic hopefuls. Bernie Sanders with a 10-point lead, Biden with a 13-point lead, Warren with a 5-point lead, and then we have Buttigieg with a 7-point lead, Kamala Harris with just a 3-point lead. And in terms of the impeachment, 59% say do not impeach Trump, 41% say do impeach Trump. And then, interesting, the racist question here, 49% of those in this New Hampshire poll think Trump is a racist, 40% say no. And in terms of the party breakup of this Gravis marketing poll, especially in those head-to-head matchups, it's interesting to see there was actually more Republicans taken in affiliation in this New Hampshire poll than the actual makeup of the state, or what you might expect. So 34% Republican, 32% Democratic, and then 34% Independent or in another party. And that's all the data that I wanted to touch on in this Gravis marketing poll, showing Bernie Sanders in first place at 21% of support for this Democratic primary. So those are the 5 polls overall that I wanted to touch on. 3 national polls, 2 state-specific results that we've gotten from this week in the polls. And if you want to continue to get updates on how the candidates are doing in the polls, you can click that subscribe button. I'm going to continue to release these videos where I go over and talk about the numbers. So thanks, guys, for stopping on in. Again, consider subscribing for more of this type of content, and I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.